What's going on, folks? Hope you're having a good Wednesday and welcome back to the Patch Notes Breakdown. We're going to scoot through this a little quickly today because I've got some exciting projects I'm working on in preparation for beta, and I'm so excited to share them with you guys. But even so, there's still plenty of really good detail in here that I want to jump into, so without further delay, let's get right into this. It starts off with the general changes, pretty basic stuff. We've got two brand new types of faction missions on the player versus environment side. First one is known as Assassinate, and second type is Elite. Assassinate missions make us go out and hunt down high-threatening targets, and elite ones take us to the most dangerous places on Eternum to fight villains and their minions. I think this is one of their ways to try to spread people out across different points of interest, because I remember in one of the patches they did say that they noticed people weren't really exploring these areas too much. So we might see more things like this in the future. But I think one of the best things they could do, and we'll preach this like we always do, but just adding more content to these areas like dynamic events or area specific content would probably also help with that too. Next few changes aren't too fancy. Added some polish to territory questing, reduced weight costs for fast travel, and adjusted the invasion rewards. Which, by the way, it seems like a confirmation that scoreboards are going to be a thing, and I really hope that extends to wars too. But the first big highlight of this patch for me is the War Declaration update. If you're not aware as to why this is so crucial, the previous way that War Declaration worked is that people in a faction could do PvP-based missions in a territory to periodically increase the influence of the area. When it reached a maximum, that territory would go into conflict mode and any companies from that faction could declare. The issue with this is that the Vanguard system was randomized. So even if you put 99% of the effort to raise the influence level, a one-man guild or some other random guild that had absolutely nothing to do with the process could snipe the declaration ownership from you, which means they could become Vanguard, and their company gets the territory if the faction wins. This caused a bit of an issue in the previous iterations because we had what was known as war sniping. A few people could start characters on the opposite factions and funnel gold into those mock guilds, and then declare the moment an enemy put the territory into conflict. But yesterday they made it to where all companies no longer have the opportunity to declare. You have to contribute at least 10% of the total influence, and the more work you put into gaining that influence, the higher the chance you'll be selected as the Vanguard. Now I know not everybody's going to agree that this was an issue, but for me personally, this is one of the biggest things I was worried about when they initially introduced this system. I'm not even planning to start a guild when the game launches because I'm going to go at it differently, but just knowing that the work these guilds put in for declaring on the territory will matter, that's more than good enough for me. The next section is the player versus player portion of this update. It's another area that still needs a bit of tweaking and love for sure, but we've got some pretty good changes here too. First thing is that when you're flagged and you die by a player, they reduce the amount of durability you lose on your gear by 50%, and they increased the experience players receive from player versus player kills and added bonuses for players that have been alive longer. Honestly, I think the thing that would probably help the most right now at getting people to flag more often, if that's the goal, is to re-implement that 10% player experience bonus when people are flagged up to fight. I think it was a great incentive for competitive players and also didn't take too much from those that just wanted a strictly player versus environment or trade skill related experience. Especially now that those players can level off of those specific methods, I think it'd be okay to add something like that back. And what surprised me though is that they introduced a cooldown for respawning at campfires in a player versus player scenario. This is one of the things that I was really worried about too, especially when we made the 4th faction video, but honestly I never expected them to really do this because there's always been so little feedback regarding this. But overall I'm just going to classify this as a pretty solid change. Next field they go into is the progression changes. Yet another thing I really liked about this patch. So they did recognize that the previous 40% increase in experience needed to level after 7 was fairly overtuned, and with this patch they're putting in a fair middle ground to help alleviate the entire experience. So now we've got a 20% reduction in the total experience required for all levels after 7. They've doubled the amount of experience gain from repeatable expedition quest lines, which I like that too because some people might want the expeditions to be a big part of their progression cycle, but of course we still need things like more dynamic events. They made several adjustments to the town projects, including tuning of the rewards, reducing the amount of required materials to complete them on the higher quality side. A larger selection of missions will now be available at any given time, so maybe 6 of them instead of 3 per section, and we've got some territory standing changes. So previously they made it where you can get experience by getting territory standing levels, and here they decided to reduce the total experience gain from gaining them, adjusted the amount of territory standing experience we get from crafting, increased the trait skill experience from doing jewel crafting, and a few other minor changes that also included more balanced earnings from questline completions. After that, we got a pretty big section for just the loot and gear portion alone. As you can see, they've continued to make even more changes to the visual styles of gear we'll get access to. First one that caught my attention was this golden black one on the right. So just based on principle alone, I'm gonna have to hunt this down. It looks like it comes from corrupted related content. The second one here too, I'm really loving the design of. Looks much more like an animalistic or barbaric type character design, something that would be perfect for a ranger or berserker build. Now the changes start with two specific things I wanted to point out. First thing is that faction heavy tier 5 armor sets have unique visuals, and lost enemies have been split into two different types to differentiate the gear that drops from them. For the first one, I know that many players have always asked if there would be any notable differences between the factions, cosmetics, lore, or otherwise, and this change seems to be one of the ways they want to answer that question. What seemed odd to me though is that they were only changes made to the heavy armor sets, and not the medium and light versions. I can't fully remember if each of the different sets for those weight classes were already unique, but I could have sworn I've seen at least the Plague Doctor outfit being worn by Syndicate players at one point in time. I think we'll have to wait to find out for sure, but also they might be planning to update the light and medium versions later on, so that could be why as well. And then for the Lost thing, this basically confirms an observation we made during the lore video featuring the Siren Queen and her plans. I noticed over time that after studying the undead pirates and their behavior in comparison to what are known as the Drowned, also known as the Withered, they do seem like two very different types of creatures, with the undead pirates being more on the sophisticated and tactical side. So even though this is a gear related change, I'm thinking it might hint towards their relationship in the lore in the future, potentially including scenarios where they fight each other. Following that, we've got some more minor base gear changes. Of course, existing designs have had some updates like the Breach Ice Gauntlet, along with weapons we get in Outpost Rush, Dynasty Shipyard, and Open World Dynasty mobs have had some additions too. And they've even added some new open world armor sets, including a 17th century Beekeeper's outfit, which really makes me want to collect that for some reason. Further down, we've got some other changes to the expedition drops and gear sets, with the basic gist being that they're improving these expedition drop rates, making these bosses drop a wider variety and higher quantity of loot when they go down, and making the items that drop from these pieces of content better. At elite points of interest, we do have some changes, including that clothing with trade skill related perks can be found at elite points of interest at endgame. Few other changes here is that players can now salvage gear they receive as drops into golden repair parts, meaning that getting resources for salvaging this gear like we used to do, that's no longer possible. Now I get why they did this. I mean, they even say that they want gathering and refining to be more meaningful, and of course when we're able to jump through hoops like that and amass a great deal of in-game resources and flood the economy with them, that does present a couple problems, especially when we have gear that never fully deteriorates or gets lost. But at the same time, I did kind of like that we were able to do it this way, because it gave even crafters two different ways of progressing themselves with pros and cons for each method. So overall, long term it probably would be better for the economy this way, but I am going to miss that just a little bit. A couple other changes after that related to tweaks they've done to the crafting trinkets, enemy family coatings being removed from the faction shop like Angry Earth coatings or the Corrupted, adjustments to the prices in the faction store to compensate for the recent economical changes they made, and a few others coming down to what is known as the watermark change. Now the watermark is like your overall gear score. With this change, what they're saying is, if you have every single item equipped at like 500 gear score, then when you hunt down level 60 plus powerful enemies like elites, the gear drops that you get from them should be relatively close or above that overall 500 gear score. So that even though we're dealing with RNG, you still have a guarantee that you're going to progress over time no matter what. And just really quick, I gotta say that I really appreciate that they're even making changes like this, because normally it should be a given that time spent should equal progress in these games, but we've seen our fair share of games with horrible RNG and lottery system based progression systems, along with games that specifically make changes in the opposite direction to try and stretch out your time spent so you keep playing, instead of trying to enhance or add on to what's already there. Even if this does reduce our time spent getting to 600 gear score, I'd still rather take it like this and just wait for them to add more content over time than the other method any day. And then the crafting and gathering section is pretty minor. Some updates to the materials we get by salvaging various fish, added the ability to combine lower tier gems into higher tier gems via the stone cutting, which I do like the option of, made some tunings to the repair kit cost, along with several other changes made to either the drop rates in gathering or the cost and crafting process of various items. And they removed the drop of foods that give trade skill bonuses from the provision chests, but those of you that still want to do crafting and gathering, make sure you don't forget this. These will be needed alongside other methods for excelling at whatever you do on that side of the game. For the last couple sections, it starts off with titles and achievements. So they changed the rarity of these titles because alpha players were mentioning that they were too many and too easy to get. So now they've made it where most of them will only be obtainable by completing higher level achievements. And I'm sure many people, including myself, are totally down for that kind of change. They also added a pronoun selector for these titles and moved where they get displayed down to where we usually see our company names. And unexpected, but we also have Steam achievements. Oddly enough, I have thought about how cool it would be to have these for New World before, but I never really brought it up because I didn't think many others would really care about them, but I'll definitely take it because that's one of my favorite things about playing games on Steam, alongside tracking my game hours. For the UX and UI changes, we've got a few small ones like how they fixed over 259 bugs with this patch, made some changes to the chat menu for quality of life, but also updated the intro cinematics with new dialogue that better sets up the story for Captain Thorpe. From a lore standpoint, that has me super interested to find out what possible new details we may get for the beginning of our journey, especially with Captain Thorpe now being associated with the so-called Tempest. Last changes go over the combat and AI plus the balancing section. The AI section starts with a 10 to 20% increase to all damage done by expedition creatures, followed up by a change to the diminishing returns to the Constitution attribute, for essentially decreasing the total amount of HP we get from Constitution, but increasing the amount we get at a lower level. They also updated the healing system with the change I think support players are gonna like. Now you no longer have to aim when you press control while channeling a healing spell for yourself. Now it just automatically does it the moment you tap control. And for balance, we got a couple nerfs across the board, but a decent buff for the life staff healing, and a couple minor changes like how the executability for great axes now has more rotations during startup, which I assume is referring to either the startup animation or the aiming of the actual skill. Next, we've got about 7 different minor nerfs for the bow, mostly on the passive and modifier side, 2 nerfs for the musket, 1 for the fire staff, a couple different changes to the ice gauntlet spells for both the wind chill and ice shower, and then finally we've got the life staff that has about 4 different changes, with 3 of them featuring buffs on the healing side. Orb of Protection now heals over time instead of granting Empower. Sacred Ground now has increased healing, which probably makes it even more viable to use. And alongside the reduction in haste for the balance passive, we've got a base healing increase for the Flash of Light. In conclusion, it's a pretty solid patch. My favorite thing about this is the Vanguard change by far, but I'm gonna cross my fingers that they can keep up the momentum of responding to player feedback in these other cases too. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and get back to work on the other stuff. As always, please let me know what you thought about this patch. Hope you have a wonderful night or day, and farewell.